Greetings, hello, and konnichiwa, YouTube. Before we dive into the food vets in this week's video, I need to add a content warning. The stupidity of our subject, both the topic and the individual that made the video, is physically painful before the facepalming even gets going. I do my best to soften the blow, but my success is somewhat limited. Again, there will be a link in the description if you want to see the original stupid without my bitchiness. I had to cut a chunk of the video this time to avoid 1.5 minutes of irrelevant bullshit, but I did describe it so that the context remains. So, without further ado, let's dig in.
We think so too. We were going to do a bunch of exercise that we had made up as the Lunar Olympics. Show you what a guy could do on the moon with a backpack on. But for a 380-pound guy, that's pretty good. They threw that out. Yeah, jump flat-footed, straight in the air. 300.
Wait, what? That math doesn't even work. The average human male between ages 21 and 30 can jump about 55.5 centimeters, mean scores, and somewhat less from a standing start. An encumbered human with the lack of flexibility and weight of a spacesuit won't get nearly that high, regardless of circumstances. If they were unencumbered, you could expect an average jump of just over 3 meters. Regardless, you applied 1/6 gravity twice, and still failed the maths. 180 times 2 is 360, divided by 6 is 60. I'm with you until right there. The rest of this makes no sense whatsoever. Quote, but in 1/6 gravity, 6 times higher. These boys should be able to jump 18 feet high no problem. This is entirely unfounded in either science or mathematics. If you apply lunar gravity, their natural jump range increases to 330 centimeters, not quite 11 feet, then again, your maths gets them to roughly 19.8 meters or about 64 feet 4 inches. Where are you getting 18 feet?
About 4 feet. Wow! Charlie, that ain't any fun, is it? That ain't very smart. Well.
Trampoline? Really? You were seeing him jumping at the same height before, and you claim trampoline while he's behind the rover. Your next claim is that it's not very far, or even close for that matter. Given the lack of flexibility at the knees and no running start, I'd say they were doing pretty well in those bulky pressurized environmental suits. The only places on those suits where mobility was considered an issue at NASA was in the hands, and even then they made specialized tools to fit hands 3 times the size they were without the gloves. Did Antarctica stop existing? Your map is flat wrong.
He said it was flat and round, and so now she's gone.
That kangaroo-type hop turned out to be the most efficient way to move in the low gravity. They struck on it as a balance between speed and precision for bodies unaccustomed to the conditions. The other one the astronauts liked was a side-to-side hopping motion. Also, if you've ever seen a real kangaroo move, they stretch their bodies along the ground to run, and these people are obviously not doing that. A few seconds later, you see the other astronaut using the side-to-side motion. Now we see a proper kangaroo running, and if you watch here, you can see the body nearly horizontal to the ground. Are you trying to debunk yourself?
As she walks on towards the unknown, she called it a twist of fate. Keep me hoping too late in the sun.
Now your symbol is a globe. Is this flat Earth or not?
There were 3 goals in today's Gemini flight: a good launch in orbit, a successful walk in space, and satisfactory rendezvous in space with the capsule's booster. 2 worked, 1 didn't. First, the launch itself. The launch had to be delayed for an hour and 16 minutes when electrical trouble developed in the erector. It was rather like running out to drive your new sports car only to find that the garage door was stuck. Well, finally, the malfunction was corrected, the erector was lowered, and the final countdown began.
Yes, erector. That's the thing that holds the spacecraft and its booster upright, phallus jokes notwithstanding.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition.
It was a picture book launch as the countdown hit zero, close to 30,000 pounds of liquid fuel ignited. For a split second, the rocket shuddered, hovered over the launch pad, then rose gracefully, majestically toward the sky. With a roar that could be heard for miles up and down the Florida beaches, the Gemini Titan IV was rising upward at the exact 72-degree angle. In the blockhouse, technicians and scientists used one word to describe it: beautiful. And those were the same words that Jim McDivitt, the command pilot, radioed back to Cape Kennedy. 5 minutes after launch and after the first stage of the Titan booster had separated, the 7,000-pound Gemini spacecraft hit that keyhole in the sky. The scene at the White House was no different.
Of course it's not flying straight up. That's because the Earth is a spinning oblate spheroid, and it takes less fuel to launch towards the east. If you want to launch straight up or to the west, you have to undo the speed advantage that Terra's eastward motion gives you. If flat Earth or geocentrism weren't bollocks, then you would have an advantage launching straight up, and the world's space programs would do that.
You saw just a second ago, and it was at millions of homes around the country and in many other sections of the world. The president sat before his television set from shortly before launch until the Gemini 4 had successfully gone into orbit. Later he said, "We've had an exciting morning, but there was more to come." For a period of about 20 minutes today, astronaut Edward White walked in space, out of his spacecraft but attached to it by a nylon tether. As a point of curiosity, in earthly terms, White walked the distance from Hawaii to Bermuda. Not so impressive, perhaps, to spacemen. Probably the high point of the day was the
Yes, it's real. The Gemini spacecraft orbited Earth once every hour and a half, give or take, so 20 minutes outside the spacecraft traveling at the same rate would take him nearly a quarter of the way around the Earth. Actually, I think that distance is a mite short, because of the necessity of giving landmarks on the surface that people can relate to.
Conversation between ground and capsule as White walked in space. And here's the way a portion of it went.
Let me take a close-up picture there. Oh, you speared up my windshield, you dirty dog. Yeah. Man, I don't even know exactly where we are, but it looks like we're about over Texas again. As a matter of fact, it looks like Houston down below us. Yeah, that's Gill's Bay right there. Hey.
The flight director says get back in.
This is Jim. What, got any message for us?
Jimmy 4, get back in.
Okay. We still got 3.5 more days to go, buddy.
Obviously, White was enjoying himself immensely. At a news conference in Houston this afternoon after the walk in space, that feat was a natural subject for questioning, as was the comparison between White's walk and that of the Russian cosmonaut Leonov. ABC correspondent Bob Young put the question.
Do you consider Ed White's performance a significant advance over the Russian performance in space?
I consider what Ed White did a significant advancement in the spaceflight operational capability of the United States.
The sound of the sky in the darkness of night. Oh, 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 oh.
How was that clip relevant? I want to know this.
Also in comparison with the Russians.
I think you have to give the Russians a great deal of credit for their extravehicular activity. We had...
Yes, extravehicular activity. When you get out of your vehicle and do stuff. Like wander around your spacecraft and check out the scenery.
Extravehicular activity ourselves today, and also gained the experience of being able to maneuver with a thruster that permits the astronaut to go where he wants to go in space without reference to any other object, without holding on to anything, without pulling on anything. And this is extremely important when we want the astronauts to go out and gather film from, say, the back of a future capsule or over to another spacecraft.
We were never able to see stars from the lunar surface or on the daylight side of the moon.
That first answer provides context, and if you are trying to make an argument, cherry picking is reprehensible.
By eye, without looking through the optics, I don't recall during the period of time that we were...
How do you know that? Did you ask Buzz this personally? Citation, please.
Photographing the sonar curl of what stars we could see. I don't remember seeing any.
Well, what didn't succeed in today's flight was a rendezvous with the capsule booster because simply the rendezvous was called off. Trying to keep up with the orbiting booster during the first revolution, the spacecraft began using fuel at an unexpectedly high rate. These comments from capsule and ground tell the story.
Climate, this is Gemini 4. We're going to have to get resolution right away whether you want me to really make a major effort to close this last thing or to save the fuel.
I think we should save the fuel.
Climate, do you read Gemini 4?
Roger, we copy. We suggest you stand by. We want to...
Yes, it was, given the circumstances. That was made by the people reporting, not by NASA, in lieu of a camera floating out there alongside the capsule and being a hazard to navigation. Also, this was 1965, and the technology then isn't what it is now. The computer you used to make this pile of shite is magic compared to the computers of the day.
Save the fuel.
Okay. I guess we've probably expended about 100 feet per second.
You've expended 100 feet per
Negative.
second?
Don't think it's worth
That's a
it.
rough guess.
Oh, Roger.
I don't think it's worth it.
The mission director has decided not to attempt any closer approaches to the booster. That is, he will not attempt, the Gemini 4 spacecraft will not attempt to come closer to the booster during this revolution when we will attempt extravehicular activity. And he will not attempt to come any closer during the fifth revolution as previously announced.
This is what the Russians have in mind for us, a film preview of the future from Soviet science. We're looking at a portion of an extensive film animation prepared by the Soviets of a projected trip to the moon, one they claim will be a reality in the next 5 to 10 years. At the beginning...
This is a concept film, intended to show people what was being considered, and how it might be done. They couldn't very well use actual footage, because in 1961 all the tech was on the drawing board. So animation was used instead. We do this today even, although the concept films are made with 3D models and render farms.
In such a flight, a spaceship propels a multi-stage rocket. As the speed increases, the rocket breaks away, and then various other stages of the rocket also fall away. After a time, it is traveling by inertia alone, with no further energy required.
This isn't quite right on their part, but generally, once you get something into orbit, it'll stay there unless acted on by an outside force, usually Terra's gravity and atmosphere.
Radar stations keep the rocket within the grasp of its radio signals. And automatically operated instruments on the ground send radio impulses back to the rocket from the Earth. And they're received by ground stations. This station guides the rocket with the help of machines to count the electronic impulses. The rocket races forward along an orbit that has been calculated months in advance. But at a command from the Earth, it can launch into another orbit. When a rocket has traveled beyond the Earth's gravity, it can head toward its goal, the gravitational field of the moon. Now a refueling rocket sets out from the Earth, and now...
All the material you see here was still on the drawing board, and not all of the science for a moon landing had been done yet. That's what Mercury and Gemini were for, after all. To get the skills, experience, and science necessary to verify what the maths told them. Flying to the moon isn't something you can plan in your garage unit, and the first 2 programs were necessary to even get to Luna without killing people.
Our rocket is headed into the moon. When it reaches the moon, a laboratory and tank treads will launch out to explore the moon. The Soviet scientists who designed this project describe it as fully possible. And it may be the next step.
So was the Flintstones. What's your point?
For the Russians. And so the pattern of Soviet triumph in space. Where are we ask tonight. Our Project Mercury will get off the ground in its first short manned shot near the end of this month. A short ride, 115 miles to the edge of space. April 28th is the earliest date. As for an orbital flight, like Russia did today, that won't come until near the end of the year, maybe not even until early next year. 10 days ago at Mercury headquarters, Langley Field, Virginia, I asked Lieutenant Colonel John Glenn, who may well be our first astronaut into space, how he would feel if the Russians beat us into space. John, if the Russians get a man up before we do, how would you feel about that?
Well, that's a good question because we've been asked this many times. There's only one answer to that. It doesn't change our program one bit. This is like saying that because Henry Ford started a new car first, no one else should be in the automobile business today. The General Motors should have dropped out before they started. Well, this is ridiculous, of course, and it's probably a ridiculous example, but the fact that the Russians happened to...
This was a common thing at that point, as NASA liked to show the folks down here what their money was being spent on. He looks like an astronaut because he is one, or soon will be at that point. By this time, a couple of chimpanzees had been launched, and the lack of ill effects on them from limited exposure to microgravity had given us the confidence to risk a human life. Quite a number of people thought that it would be deadly even with a pressure suit and cabin filled with air. Inner ear problems, digestion issues, etc. Today, we leave people up there for months or years at a time, and the effects are well understood.
Get a shot off or may not get a shot off a little bit before we do doesn't alter the objectives of our program.
Looks like a rocket motor, but I can't tell. Likely it's some sort of model.
A bit. Our program is not set up just as a race to space. We're well aware of the international implications of this, but this doesn't alter the step-by-step progression that we want our program to go through to see that man safely starts space exploration. We have our goals, I guess they...
Car salesman? You're going with that? The politics of the Cold War necessitated this situation, and Russian superiority wasn't an option for the politicians or people of the United States. The whole idea captured the minds and imaginations of the entire world, and gave birth to a pile of new industries, including the ones that provided the computer I'm using to tear you a new rectum.
They have theirs, and the fact that they do or do not get a shot off ahead of us will not alter the objects of Project Mercury.
We're not going to change our plans.
No.
I'm going to cut this next chunk out, as all you've done is compare NASA to a foul-mouthed used car salesman as strawman, red herring, and non sequitur all wrapped into a single act.
CBS Television presents a special report on Sputnik 1, the Soviet space satellite. Douglas Edwards reporting.
Until 2 days ago, that sound had never been heard on this earth. Suddenly, it has become as much a part of 20th century life as the whir of your vacuum cleaner.
It made that noise because that was what the Soviets designed it to do. No more, no less. It was modulation of a common carrier frequency so the Russians could prove they'd done the job. Anyone could tune into the frequency, and at predictable times the noise would appear for a little while, and disappear as Sputnik moved further along its orbit. Rather clever of them, using a noise that wasn't commonly heard in that day and age on the radio.
It's a report from man's farthest frontier, the radio signal transmitted by the Soviet Sputnik, the first man-made satellite as it passed over New York earlier today. One of the places where the progress of the satellite is being watched most closely is the Hayden Planetarium in New York. CBS News correspondent Richard C. Hottelet reports from there now.
Doug, we're in the great dome of the Hayden Planetarium in New York, and I have with me Dr. Kenneth Franklin, an astronomer on the planetarium staff. Dr. Franklin, can you tell us where the Sputnik...
That would be a projector for showing the starfield on the dome. It has two of those ends, one for northern hemisphere, and one for southern. Because the starfields are nothing like one another, and Polaris is not Sigma Octanes.
is now and how it's moving?
Right now it's north of Auckland, New Zealand, and moving southeast. It will be, in 10 minutes, about 1,500 miles...
That's a projection line, put there because no one expects the guy drawing the line to be able to do those kinds of maths in his head. Orbital mechanics take time to work out, and for the news, he can't afford to skip a beat.
North of Little America, and in about 24 minutes it will be over Santiago, Chile, and at about 50 minutes from now, it will be over Spain.
Well, it looks as though it'll be missing the United States on this trip.
That's quite correct, it will.
But it does come over here periodically, doesn't it?
It comes over here at least twice a day and maybe more.
Getting back to this track, is it possible that it is transmitting a code, not just a beep signal for radio listening?
Yes, it's quite possible that it's transmitting a code, but we don't realize what the code is, of course.
Not fear-mongering, just simple ignorance and a tuft of fear on their own parts as a direct result of the state of the Cold War in 1957. He gives the intellectually honest answer up front, he doesn't know, but admits the possibility. It true, then they have no idea what code might be in use. No attempt at prevarication is being made by anyone but you.
The initial thrust to get it into the air comes from the lowest and biggest of the rockets in the tandem. When the American satellite is launched, the takeoff power will come from a rocket like this one shown in a recent test. The powerful thrust of the Aerobee sends the whole assembly up through the dense stratosphere, a layer of heavy air 50 miles thick surrounding the Earth. The first rocket is then dropped, its fuel exhausted. A second rocket...
Yes, animation, and for the same reason they used it in 1961. They can't use live-action footage because it's a concept, and no real objects of this type exist. Unlike the other one, this one appears to be the United States design, and a Soviet design.
Rocket ignites and takes over. Altitude 140 miles, satellite being stripped for action. It's that round ball in the nose. Altitude better than 250 miles, and the second rocket burns out, but its momentum carries the whole assembly forward. Second rocket spent, the third and last one takes over, the final thrust that carries the satellite into its chosen orbit. Then all the rocket power gone, but tremendous force has been built up, and the satellite is pushed off on its own at a speed of 18,000 miles an hour. A fixed course circling the Earth beyond the reach of the Earth's gravitational pull. Hundreds of miles in space, the satellite's instruments start collecting data, sending it back in the form of radio signals. A pilotless spaceship, man's advanced scout in outer space.
I usually take a size 36.
One is a Bugs Bunny cartoon from 1948 called Haredevil Hare, intended to be comical, and the other is an attempt to show people what they're talking about in lieu of actual footage of a real thing they haven't built yet.
We've heard in these reports from both at home and abroad this afternoon, the course of United States policies in the competition with Russia has been severely shaken. This is Douglas Edwards. Good evening.
Again you show us the sphere version of your logo declaring flat earth news. I see no news here, and worse, I see a lot of things that are the opposite of news, lies, manipulation, straw men, distractions and all-around ignorance. Mare Ziller has made a mockery of your claims using nothing more than simple mathematics, and this doesn't even rate as the best of the moon hoax stuff. Using this as a defense of flat earth is itself a red herring, and one that annoys me greatly. Nearly nothing you have now would have even been possible without the manned space programs. Therefore, you have the honor of being the star of the first Flat Earth Follies. If you've gotten to the end of this video, rate and comment. If you want to see more of this sort of content, then feel free to subscribe. This week's shout-out is for the criminally undersubbed Mare Ziller, whose shredding of a couple of other Flat Earth videos was the kick in the ass I needed to start making videos myself. His videos are informative and entertaining, and well I know how hard that is to pull off sometimes. Give his channel a look and a subscribe. This guy is one of my favorite smaller YouTubers, and he's fighting the fight no one thinks needs it. I'll be back later in the week with more random rants and another anti-ignorance video for next week. Right now it's looking like Eric Hovind or Ian Juby, but I will take suggestions in the comments. Until then.